Hey, sweetheart. Care to explain why an intern is sitting in the Pentagon's highest level war room? Commander Vance Bridgerton's voice boomed across the secure briefing chamber, his tone dripping with theatrical disdain that made the entire room fall silent. He stood ramrod straight, his perfectly pressed uniform showcasing rows of gleaming metals under the harsh fluorescent lights. A 6'4" frame that dominated the space like a monument to military perfection. Serafina Blackwood remained motionless at the far end of the mahogany conference table, her blue eyes fixed steadily ahead without so much as a blink. Her long blue-black hair fell in gentle waves past her shoulders, contrasting sharply with her porcelain skin and the defined cheekbones that gave her face an almost ethereal quality. She wore a simple white button-down shirt and black slacks, looking exactly like what everyone assumed she was, a junior intelligence analyst completely out of her depth. Especially when we're discussing the highest-level intelligence threats facing our nation, Admiral Preston Hawthorne added, his voice carrying the cold authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. His weathered face bore the lines of 3 decades in command, and his pale gray eyes seemed to dissect everything they observed. Does this little girl even have the appropriate clearance, Bridgerton? Scattered chuckles rippled through the room. 15 senior officers, all male, all decorated veterans of multiple combat deployments, looked at Sarah as if she were an amusing mistake that had somehow wandered into their sacred space. The Pentagon's War Room Alpha was reserved for only the most critical national security briefings, and seeing a young woman who looked barely old enough for graduate school sitting among hardened warriors struck them as absurd. "I'm sure she makes excellent coffee," Captain Reed Donovan offered, with a smirk that created fresh waves of laughter. His perfectly trimmed beard framed features that belonged on recruitment posters, and his voice carried the casual cruelty of someone who had never faced real consequences for his words. "But we're discussing Operation Shadowfall here, not filing systems or scheduling meetings." Sarah breathed slowly, deliberately. 4 seconds in, 4 seconds held, 4 seconds out. The rhythm was so natural it appeared effortless, but her fingers rested flat against the polished table surface with a precision that spoke of careful training. No nervous fidgeting, no defensive posturing, just controlled stillness that somehow managed to look both submissive and coiled simultaneously. The morning sun streaming through reinforced windows cast long shadows across the room's marble floors, but it was Bridgerton's shadow that seemed to engulf Sarah's small frame like an omen of what was to come. In exactly 18 minutes, when that crisp white shirt would tear and reveal what lay hidden beneath, every person in that room would understand they had just witnessed the most catastrophic mistake of Vance Bridgerton's decorated career. Bridgerton circled Sarah like a predator, showcasing his catch, his polished boots clicking against the marble with military precision. "Tell me, little analyst, what exactly qualifies you to participate in discussions about special operations that have cost better people than you their lives?" Lieutenant Maya Sterling shifted uncomfortably in her chair near the room's center. At 28, she had earned her position through exceptional intelligence analysis and an analytical mind that could process vast amounts of data with surgical precision. Her auburn hair was pulled back in regulation style, and her green eyes held the sharp intelligence of someone who noticed details others missed. Something about Sarah's posture caught her attention, the way the young woman's breathing remained absolutely controlled, despite the mounting pressure, the way her hands rested with military precision, despite having no visible military background. Who is she really? That controlled breathing, those precise movements, the way she analyzes classified data like she's reading a grocery list. Something doesn't add up about this intern. If you're already wondering what Sarah is hiding behind that quiet exterior, hit that like button and drop your theory in the comments. What do you think her real identity is? Perhaps our intern could start by explaining how she obtained access to this briefing, Admiral Hawthorne suggested, his voice carrying the subtle threat that had ended careers throughout his 3 decades of command. Security protocols exist for reasons that transcend individual feelings or academic curiosity. Colonel Sarah Hunt straightened in her chair near the room's far wall. Hunt was a veteran intelligence officer whose 43 years included multiple deployments in hostile territories. And she possessed the kind of analytical mind that had saved countless lives through careful planning and meticulous preparation. Her salt and pepper hair framed a face marked by intelligence and determination, and her brown eyes studied Sarah with growing interest rather than the dismissive mockery shown by her male colleagues. "Commander Bridgerton, Hunt said quietly. Perhaps we should focus on the briefing objectives rather than personnel questions that can be addressed through appropriate channels. Bridgerton's perfect smile widened, but it never reached his eyes. Of course, Colonel, but when we're discussing operations that put American lives at risk, I believe it's appropriate to ensure everyone present has earned their place through demonstrated competence rather than administrative oversight. The insult was surgical, designed to humiliate without providing grounds for formal complaint. Sarah absorbed it without reaction, her blue eyes remaining fixed on the table's surface. But Specialist Jake Morrison, a lean intelligence analyst in his early 30s, caught something that made his blood run cold. As Sarah reached for her water glass, her right hand moved with the unconscious precision of someone trained in tactical weapon handling. The grip, the finger placement, the controlled movement all spoke of extensive combat training. Morrison had spent 8 years in special operations before transitioning to intelligence work, and he recognized muscle memory when he saw it. That wasn't the hand movement of an office worker. It was the automatic response pattern of someone who had handled weapons under life-or-death pressure. The room's massive display screen flickered to life, showing satellite imagery of Eastern European terrain marked with red zones indicating hostile activity. Admiral Hawthorne stepped toward the front, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor with metronomic precision. Gentlemen, we have a developing crisis that requires immediate attention and coordinated response, Hawthorne announced, his voice cutting through the room's tension like a blade. 3 of our most valuable intelligence assets have been captured in a coordinated operation that suggests enemy forces had inside knowledge of their movements. The atmosphere shifted instantly from mockery to deadly serious focus. These weren't training exercises or theoretical scenarios. Real operators, real lives, real consequences hung in the balance. Sarah remained perfectly still, but Morrison noticed her eyes began moving with subtle efficiency, cataloging details on the screen with a speed and precision that would have been remarkable in a seasoned analyst, let alone an intern. Asset designations, Ghost 7, Ghost 12, and Ghost 15 were conducting a reconnaissance mission in Sector 47 when communications went dark approximately 72 hours ago, Hawthorne continued, highlighting specific coordinates on the satellite display. Satellite surveillance confirms they're being held in a fortified compound that our intelligence suggests is being used as an interrogation facility. Sarah's breathing pattern remained controlled, but Morrison caught a subtle change in her posture. Not fear or uncertainty, but the heightened alertness of someone processing tactical information. Her fingers moved against the table surface in what appeared to be nervous fidgeting, but Morrison recognized it as the unconscious pattern recognition behavior of operators trained in rapid threat assessment. Advanced military-grade medical monitoring systems track vital signs and stress indicators for special operations personnel in hostile environments worldwide. Bridgerton leaned back in his chair with the casual arrogance of someone who had never doubted his own superiority. What's the assessment on extraction possibilities? Are we looking at a realistic rescue mission or damage control procedures? That, Hawthorne replied with grim satisfaction, is exactly what we need to determine. And since Lieutenant Commander Morgan insisted on including additional personnel in our briefing, perhaps our analyst would like to share her expert opinion on complex military extraction procedures. The mockery was designed to expose incompetence and justify dismissal. Every eye in the room turned toward Sarah, waiting for stammering embarrassment or tearful retreat. Instead, she stood with fluid grace that seemed almost choreographed, moving toward the display screen with steps that measured exactly the right distance, exactly the right rhythm. Morrison's breath caught in his throat. That movement pattern wasn't learned in corporate training seminars or academic programs. It was the spatial awareness of someone who had operated in environments where a single misstep meant death. The terrain analysis suggests multiple approach vectors, Sarah said, her voice steady and clinical. But satellite imagery indicates defensive positioning, designed specifically to counter Western extraction methodologies. The room went quiet in a different way now. This wasn't dismissive silence. This was focused attention. Her analysis was too accurate, too specific, too sophisticated for someone who should have been filing reports in a basement office. Captain Donovan leaned forward with predatory interest. That's very impressive textbook knowledge, sweetheart, but perhaps you could explain how someone with your limited experience recognizes defensive positioning patterns. The guard tower placement follows Soviet-era counter-infiltration doctrine, Sarah replied without hesitation. moving closer to the screen with confidence that seemed to materialize from nowhere. Overlapping fields of fire eliminate standard approach vectors while creating the illusion of defensive gaps that actually funnel attacking forces into predetermined killing zones. Morrison felt ice form in his veins. That level of specific knowledge about historical military architecture wasn't something you learned from general intelligence training. It was the kind of detailed understanding that came from extensive briefings on specific operational areas, the kind of knowledge possessed by operators who had actually conducted missions in those environments. Colonel Hunt straightened in her chair with sudden sharp attention. "Explain the killing zone configuration." Sarah touched the screen, bringing up a three-dimensional tactical overlay that shouldn't have been accessible to someone with basic clearance levels. The interface responded to her commands with the fluidity of extensive familiarity, not the hesitation of someone learning new systems. "The apparent weakness here," Sarah said, highlighting a section of the compound's perimeter, actually channels infiltration teams toward this depression, where concealed positions provide overlapping fire from three directions. Enemy forces don't need to prevent infiltration. They just need to control where it occurs. Specialist Morrison's hands trembled slightly as he watched Sarah manipulate classified display systems with casual expertise. Those weren't standard analyst tools. They were specialized tactical planning interfaces used by Special Operations commanders. Staff Sergeant Dylan Ramsey, sitting near the room's back wall, raised his hand with nervous uncertainty. "Ma'am, that level of tactical analysis suggests knowledge of enemy operational doctrine that's classified above my clearance level." Sarah turned toward him with eyes that held something Morrison couldn't identify. Not fear or defensiveness, but the patient assessment of someone evaluating whether to reveal additional information. "Soviet defensive doctrine is well documented in historical military studies," she replied calmly. "The principles apply regardless of specific classification levels." But as she spoke, her laptop screen glowed to life, casting pale blue light across her features. Morrison, positioned at the correct angle, caught a glimpse of text scrolling past that made his heart race. "Kingfisher declassified partial, decryption in progress, 12%. Kingfisher was classified so far beyond Morrison's access level that even knowing the operation name could end careers. Whatever was running on Sarah's computer existed in classification spaces that most people in the room couldn't even imagine. Bridgerton sensed his moment of dominance slipping away and pressed harder. "It's fascinating how our intern seems to know so much about enemy tactics for someone whose previous experience involves academic analysis rather than operational reality." The challenge hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Everyone present understood they were witnessing more than casual dismissal. This was a deliberate attempt to expose someone who dared speak above her perceived station. "Perhaps," Admiral Hawthorne added with cold precision, "you could clarify your specific background in tactical analysis, Miss Blackwood." Sarah returned to her seat with those same measured movements, but Morrison caught another detail that sent chills through his nervous system. As she sat down, her right hand brushed against the edge of her laptop bag, fingers curling around a pen clipped to the strap with a grip that belonged to someone who had held weapons under extreme pressure. Index finger extended along the barrel line, thumb applying precise counterforce. Textbook tactical weapon grip applied unconsciously to an office supply. The clues are everywhere now, aren't they? Those impossible skills, that muscle memory, the way she handles pressure. If your mind is racing trying to piece together who Sarah really is, hit subscribe, because the truth is about to shatter everything. My background includes extensive study of international military doctrine and tactical analysis, Sarah replied with the same calm precision that had characterized every response. Academic preparation for intelligence work requires comprehensive understanding of global military capabilities. Morrison's laptop chimed with an incoming message that made his blood freeze. He glanced at the screen, then did a double-take that nearly knocked over his coffee. The message was from the Defense Intelligence Agency's personnel verification system, and it contained a single line that redefined everything. Background check initiated. Classification level insufficient for complete verification. That message meant someone had triggered security protocols beyond Morrison's access level. Someone in the room was operating under classification so deep that standard background checks couldn't penetrate it. "Academic preparation," Donovan repeated with renewed mockery. "How absolutely adorable. Tell me, little scholar, what makes you think classroom theory applies to real-world special operations?" Sarah looked at him with eyes that held something Morrison was beginning to recognize as carefully controlled patience. Because theoretical understanding provides foundation for practical application when circumstances require adaptive responses to unexpected variables. The words were academic, safe, revealing nothing. But Morrison caught the subtle shift in her breathing pattern, the way her fingers moved against the laptop keyboard with unconscious precision. She was typing commands that looked like note-taking, but followed patterns more consistent with system infiltration or data extraction. The decryption progress indicator in the corner of her screen ticked upward. 15%, 18%, 22%. Admiral Hawthorne pulled up additional satellite imagery showing the compound from multiple angles. Intelligence reports suggest our captured assets were specifically targeted rather than randomly encountered. The precision of the operation indicates enemy forces possess detailed knowledge of mission parameters. Which means, Colonel Hunt added grimly, we're dealing with either systematic penetration of our communication networks or deliberate sabotage by someone with access to operational planning. The implications settled over the room like a toxic cloud. If enemy forces had penetrated American intelligence networks deeply enough to compromise special operations, the damage could extend far beyond 3 captured assets. Sarah continued working on her laptop with steady concentration that appeared casual but struck Morrison as intensely focused. The decryption indicator climbed steadily, 25%, 28%, 31%. The timing suggests coordination between multiple enemy intelligence services, she said quietly, not looking up from her screen. Single-source penetration wouldn't provide the operational intelligence necessary for such precise targeting. Morrison's breath caught. That assessment demonstrated understanding of intelligence coordination that went far beyond academic study. It was the kind of analysis produced by professionals with direct experience in counterintelligence operations. Bridgerton leaned forward with predatory satisfaction. Such sophisticated analysis from our intern? Perhaps you could explain how academic research provides insight into enemy intelligence coordination. Pattern recognition applies across multiple analytical frameworks, Sarah replied without hesitation. Enemy coordination leaves digital signatures that can be identified through systematic analysis of communication intercepts and operational timing. But as she spoke, something changed on her laptop screen that made Morrison's hands shake. New data began populating. Communication intercepts, operational summaries, personnel files, all bearing classification stamps that shouldn't have existed on any system accessible in War Room Alpha. Morrison leaned closer, trying to read the file headers without being obvious. What he saw made his world tilt. Operation Nightfall, classified eyes only, ghost protocol activated. He had never heard of Operation Nightfall, but he recognized the classification level. Ghost Protocol was reserved for operations so sensitive they existed in legal gray areas, conducted by personnel whose very existence was classified. Staff Sergeant Ramsey raised his hand again, his boyish features flushed with nervous energy. Admiral, I'm receiving reports of additional communication intercepts from the captured assets. They appear to have established contact with an unknown handler before going dark. Hawthorne's weathered features hardened with deadly focus. Display the intercepts. The main screen flickered, showing encrypted message traffic that made everyone in the room understand they were dealing with something far more complex than a simple rescue mission. The encryption signatures were unlike anything in standard military protocols. Those encryption patterns, Morrison said quietly, his voice tight with recognition. They're not standard special operations protocols. No, Sarah agreed, standing and moving toward the display screen again. They're not. She touched the screen interface, and Morrison watched in amazement as layers of military-grade encryption began dissolving like tissue paper. Access codes that should have taken specialized teams hours to crack fell away under her commands with impossible ease. The decrypted messages appeared on screen in stark, undeniable text. Nightfall protocol activated. Ghost network compromised. Assets require immediate extraction. Enemy forces have penetrated highest levels. The silence that followed was absolute. Morrison stared at the screen, his military training warring with disbelief. Nightfall protocol wasn't just classified, it was the kind of designation that suggested operations beyond normal military structure. What is Nightfall protocol? Bridgerton demanded, his perfect confidence showing the first cracks. Colonel Hunt's face had gone pale with recognition. "Admiral, I believe we need to escalate this briefing to higher classification levels." But before Hawthorne could respond, Sarah's laptop chimed with a priority alert that changed everything. She glanced at the screen, and for the first time since entering the room, her composure showed the slightest reaction. Morrison caught the change immediately. "What is it?" Sarah looked around the room with eyes that suddenly held calculation instead of submission. "Database search has returned preliminary results on personnel verification." She turned her laptop screen toward the room, revealing a photograph that made every person present understand they had been completely, catastrophically wrong about everything. The image showed a woman in full special operations gear standing in what appeared to be a Middle Eastern battlefield. The face was partially obscured by tactical equipment, but the bone structure, the eyes, the distinctive cheekbones were unmistakably recognizable. Below the photograph, text scrolled past in classified formatting. Sarah Black, MIT graduate, intelligence analyst, cover identity confirmed. Morrison's jaw dropped. "Sarah Black? You're Sarah Black?" Sarah nodded calmly. "My actual name is classified, but Sarah Black is the identity I've been operating under for the past 18 months. The room erupted in controlled chaos as everyone processed the implications. MIT graduate explained the sophisticated analysis, the technical expertise, the casual familiarity with complex systems. Bridgerton's perfect features showed confusion and grudging respect. MIT, that's impressive credentials for an intern. But Morrison was studying the classified photograph more closely, and something didn't add up. The combat gear, the battlefield setting, the operational context all suggested someone far more than an academic analyst. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "that photograph appears to show active combat deployment rather than research assignment." Sarah met his gaze with eyes that held depths he was just beginning to understand. Intelligence work sometimes requires field deployment to verify analytical conclusions. The explanation was reasonable, logical, completely plausible. But Morrison's combat-trained instincts screamed that something fundamental was still being concealed. His laptop chimed with another message from the personnel verification system. "Secondary classification check initiated. Ghost protocol authorization required." Morrison felt ice form in his stomach. Ghost protocol authorization meant Sarah Black, whoever she really was, operated at classification levels that exceeded his security clearance by orders of magnitude. Specialized high-tier life insurance provides extensive coverage for military veterans and intelligence personnel with exceptional service histories. Admiral Hawthorne moved closer to the display screen, his 3 decades of command experience allowing him to process rapidly changing situations with deadly efficiency. "Miss Black, I believe it's time for complete transparency about your role in this operation." Sarah looked around the room, her blue eyes meeting each person's gaze with steady assessment. The nervous, submissive analyst had vanished completely, replaced by someone who radiated quiet confidence. "My role," she said with subtle authority that hadn't been there before, "is to provide analytical support for complex extraction operations in hostile environments." Morrison's secure phone rang with the distinctive tone reserved for emergency intelligence updates. He answered, listened for 30 seconds, and his face went white. "Admiral," he said, his voice tight with alarm, "we have a priority update on the captured assets. Specify. Enemy forces have accelerated their timeline. Public execution has been scheduled for 1800 hours today. That's 4 hours from now." The room went dead silent as everyone processed the implications. 4 hours to plan, coordinate, and execute a rescue mission that would normally require weeks of preparation. But then something happened that defied every assumption they had made. Sarah began typing on her laptop with sudden intensity, her fingers moving across the keys with the kind of speed and precision that spoke of extensive training and rapid data processing under pressure. "That timeline is manageable," she said quietly. Bridgerton stared at her with disbelief. "Manageable? You think a 4-hour extraction timeline is manageable? I think 4 hours provides sufficient time for mission planning if we utilize appropriate tactical approaches," Sarah replied with calm authority that seemed to emerge from nowhere. The decryption progress indicator jumped to 67%, and suddenly new data exploded across her screen. Personnel files, mission records, operational histories, all bearing classification stamps that made Morrison understand he was witnessing something far beyond normal intelligence operations. "Ma'am," Morrison said carefully, Your computer access appears to extend into classification levels that exceed standard analytical authorization. Sarah looked at him with something that might have been amusement. My authorization extends as far as mission requirements dictate. Colonel Hunt leaned forward with laser focus. What specific authorization do you carry? Authorization sufficient to coordinate extraction operations for compromised intelligence assets, Sarah replied. The specific classification level is compartmentalized based on operational security requirements. Morrison's laptop chimed again with a message that made his hands shake. Personnel verification complete. Subject identity classified above requesting clearance level. Refer to Ghost Protocol documentation. Ghost Protocol documentation was something Morrison had heard whispered about but never actually seen. It represented operations so sensitive that knowing about them required special authorization from intelligence agencies that officially didn't exist. Admiral Hawthorne studied Sarah with the careful attention of someone who had spent 3 decades evaluating potential threats and opportunities. Miss Black, your knowledge and capabilities appear to exceed what we would expect from standard analytical personnel. My training has been comprehensive, Sarah replied with the same measured calm. But Morrison caught something in her voice, a subtle shift that suggested layers of meaning beneath surface words. Comprehensive training could mean many things, but combined with her technical capabilities and classification levels, it suggested something far more significant than academic preparation. Captain Donovan, who had been silent during the revelation about Sarah Black's MIT background, leaned forward with renewed suspicion. Comprehensive training in what specific areas? Intelligence analysis, tactical assessment, and operational planning, Sarah replied without hesitation. Standard curriculum for personnel assigned to sensitive analytical positions. The words were safe, revealing nothing while suggesting everything. But Morrison noticed her breathing pattern had shifted again, maintaining the same controlled rhythm but with subtle changes that spoke of heightened alertness. The laptop screen showed the decryption progress climbing toward completion, 73%, 76%, 81%. Ma'am, Morrison said quietly, what exactly is being decrypted on your system? Sarah looked at him with eyes that held depths he was just beginning to comprehend. Historical operational data relevant to current mission parameters. Historical data from what time period? The past 24 months. Morrison felt the world shift around him. 24 months of historical operational data meant access to every significant intelligence operation conducted during that period. That wasn't analyst access. That was command-level authorization. Bridgerton, sensing his authority slipping away, pressed harder. I think it's time for our MIT graduate to explain exactly what qualifies her for command-level access to sensitive intelligence operations. The challenge was direct, unavoidable, designed to force revelation or exposure. Everyone in the room understood this was the moment when Sarah Black would either justify her presence or be removed under escort. Sarah stood slowly, her movements carrying a fluidity that Morrison recognized as combat-trained spatial awareness. She walked to the main display screen, her steps measuring exactly the right distance, exactly the right rhythm. My qualifications, she said quietly, include 18 months of field operations in classified environments conducting intelligence gathering on enemy penetration of American Special Operations networks. The words hit the room like physical blows. Morrison's breath caught. 18 months of field operations meant active deployment in hostile territories. That wasn't analytical work. That was special operations. Colonel Hunt straightened with sudden understanding. Field operations in what capacity? Deep cover infiltration of enemy intelligence networks, Sarah replied with surgical precision. Primary mission objective was identification of American intelligence compromises and enemy operational capabilities. The room went completely silent as everyone processed the implications. Deep cover infiltration was among the most dangerous assignments in military intelligence, requiring operators trained to survive in hostile environments while maintaining false identities for extended periods. Admiral Hawthorne stepped closer with growing respect. Miss Black, I believe we need to discuss your actual operational status. But before Sarah could respond, her laptop completed its decryption with a soft chime, 100%. New files flooded the screen, showing operational summaries that painted a picture of systematic betrayal at the highest levels of American intelligence. The captured assets weren't random targets, Sarah said. highlighting specific data on the main display. They were specifically identified because their intelligence work uncovered evidence of enemy penetration at levels we previously thought impossible. Morrison leaned forward with growing alarm. What kind of penetration? The kind that allows enemy forces to monitor American Special Operations communications in real time, Sarah replied, bringing up communication intercepts that made everyone in the room understand the scope of the crisis, including communications from this briefing room. The implications hit like lightning strikes. If enemy forces were monitoring War Room Alpha communications, every word spoken, every plan discussed, every operational decision was being transmitted to hostile intelligence services. Captain Donovan's face went ashen. You're saying this briefing has been compromised? I'm saying enemy forces have been receiving real-time intelligence about American operations for approximately 6 months, Sarah replied with deadly calm, including advance notice of rescue mission planning that began before this briefing officially started. Morrison's hands shook as he processed the revelation. Ma'am, if enemy forces know about rescue planning in advance, any extraction mission would be walking into a prepared ambush. Exactly, Sarah confirmed. Which is why conventional extraction approaches won't succeed. Bridgerton, his perfect confidence completely shattered, found his voice. Then what do you suggest? Sarah looked around the room with eyes that held 18 months of surviving in hostile territories while maintaining covers deep enough to infiltrate enemy intelligence networks. I suggest, she said with quiet authority, that we stop pretending this is a conventional rescue mission. As she spoke, new data appeared on the main display screen, showing enemy force dispositions, communication intercepts, and tactical assessments that demonstrated knowledge far beyond what any academic analyst should possess. Morrison stared at the screen, reading operational summaries that redefined everything he thought he knew about modern intelligence warfare. Ma'am, this level of intelligence suggests direct operational experience rather than analytical study. Sarah met his gaze with eyes that held depths he was finally beginning to understand. Experience and study often overlap in intelligence work, Specialist Morrison. The laptop chimed with an incoming priority message that changed everything. Sarah read the screen, and for the first time since revealing her Sarah Black identity, her composure showed a crack. What is it? Colonel Hunt demanded. Sarah looked up with eyes that held something that made everyone in the room understand the situation had just become catastrophically worse. Enemy forces have moved the execution timeline again, she said quietly. Our assets have 90 minutes before public execution. The silence that followed was absolute. Did you see that coming, when everything you thought you knew gets flipped upside down in seconds? Share this if you love stories where the quiet ones turn out to be legends hiding in plain sight. 90 minutes to plan, coordinate, and execute a rescue mission against enemy forces who knew they were coming. 90 minutes to save 3 Americans, whose deaths would send a message that would cripple intelligence operations worldwide. Admiral Hawthorne stepped forward with grim determination. Miss Black, what do you require for mission success? But Sarah's response shattered every remaining assumption in the room. I require these gentlemen to understand that Sarah Black is also a cover identity, she said with surgical precision, and that my actual operational designation has been classified as deceased for the past 18 months. Morrison felt his world tilt completely off its axis. Deceased? Killed in action during Operation Nightfall in Afghanistan, Sarah replied with calm that seemed almost surreal. Officially, I don't exist. The room erupted in controlled chaos as everyone tried to process what they had just heard. Officially deceased meant deep cover operations beyond anything in standard military doctrine. Bridgerton's voice cracked as he spoke. If you're officially dead, then who are you? Sarah looked at him with eyes that held 18 months of being a ghost. 18 months of operating in spaces between life and death, where normal rules didn't apply. I'm the person who's going to bring our people home, she said quietly. But as she spoke, something happened that would change everything. Her white shirt, already stressed from the day's tensions, caught on the edge of the display screen as she reached to highlight enemy positions. The fabric tore, not completely, but enough to reveal a glimpse of something underneath that made Morrison's blood freeze. Black fabric that wasn't an undershirt. Tactical material that spoke of operational gear worn beneath civilian clothes. Morrison's eyes widened as he realized what he was seeing. Ma'am, are you currently deployed? Sarah looked at him with something that might have been appreciation for his observational skills. I'm currently operating under deep cover assignment with mission parameters that classified above this briefing's clearance level. Deep cover assignment, Colonel Hunt repeated slowly. In what operational capacity? Capacity sufficient to coordinate extraction of compromised intelligence assets, Sarah replied. Authorization extends through Ghost Protocol with unlimited operational discretion. Morrison's laptop exploded with activity as his security checks finally penetrated deep enough to access real information. What appeared on his screen made him understand that every assumption they had made was not just wrong, but catastrophically, dangerously wrong. Status verification complete, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Subject classification, Ghost Protocol active. Mission status, deep cover operational, authority level, unlimited. Admiral Hawthorne moved closer with the careful attention of someone whose 3 decades of command experience had taught him to recognize when situations transcended normal parameters. Miss Black, he said with growing respect, I believe it's time for you to tell us who you really are. Sarah looked around the room at faces that had spent 18 minutes mocking someone they assumed was powerless. Now they were staring at evidence suggesting she possessed operational authority that exceeded their own. Sir, she said with quiet precision, my actual identity is classified at levels that would require additional authorization for revelation in this setting. Then what can you tell us? I can tell you that bringing our assets home alive requires immediate action using non-conventional approaches, Sarah replied, and I can tell you that enemy forces are currently monitoring our communications while preparing to execute 3 Americans in approximately 87 minutes. Morrison looked at his laptop screen, where new data continued streaming in from classification levels he hadn't known existed. Ma'am, the intelligence you have access to suggests operational capabilities far beyond analytical support. Operational capabilities are mission-dependent, Sarah replied with the same controlled calm. Current mission parameters require comprehensive response. But then her secure communication device chimed with a tone Morrison recognized as emergency intelligence priority. Sarah glanced at the message, and her carefully controlled expression showed the slightest reaction. Priority intelligence update, she announced. Enemy forces have detected American intelligence activities related to rescue planning. They're accelerating execution timeline to 72 minutes and relocating assets to a secondary facility. Captain Donovan's face went white. 72 minutes to hit a moving target? 72 minutes to intercept assets during transfer between facilities, Sarah corrected, with tactical precision that spoke of extensive operational experience. Transfer creates vulnerability windows that static defense doesn't provide. Morrison stared at her with growing awe and terror. Ma'am, that assessment suggests knowledge of enemy operational patterns that could only come from direct intelligence gathering. Intelligence gathering is my primary mission, Sarah replied. Extraction capability is secondary, but available when circumstances require. Admiral Hawthorne stepped closer, with the recognition of someone who understood they were witnessing something unprecedented. Miss Black, I need to know your actual operational authority. Sarah looked at him with eyes that held 18 months of survival in hostile territories, while maintaining covers so deep they required official death certificates. Sir, she said with quiet authority that seemed to fill the room, my operational authority extends as far as mission success requires. As she spoke, her laptop chimed with final confirmation data that appeared on the main display screen. Personnel files, operational summaries, mission records, all bearing classification stamps that made everyone present understand they were dealing with something far beyond their security clearance. But it was the photograph that appeared at the center of the screen that changed everything. Not the Sarah Black MIT photograph, but something else entirely. A tactical photograph showing a figure in advanced special operations gear, standing in what appeared to be a classified operational environment. The face was clearly visible now, and it was unmistakably Sarah. But beneath the photograph, text appeared that made every person in the room understand they had been spectacularly, dangerously wrong about everything. Operational designation, Nightfall, status, deep cover active, mission classification, Ghost Protocol unlimited. Morrison's hands trembled as he stared at the screen. Nightfall, you're Nightfall. Bridgerton stumbled backward, his perfect features draining of all color. Nightfall was killed in action 18 months ago. The reports confirmed KIA status. The reports, Colonel Hunt said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn, were cover stories. Sarah looked around the room at faces showing expressions ranging from shock to disbelief to something approaching awe. For 18 minutes, they had mocked, dismissed, and humiliated someone whose operational capabilities exceeded their understanding. "Gentlemen," she said with quiet authority that carried the weight of 18 months spent operating in spaces where normal people couldn't survive, Nightfall was never killed in action. Nightfall went underground to hunt the people who betrayed our operations. Morrison felt reality reshape around him. "You've been hunting enemy intelligence networks for 18 months? "I've been infiltrating enemy intelligence networks," Sarah corrected. "Hunting implies they knew I was coming." The room went completely silent as everyone processed the implications. 18 months of deep cover infiltration meant operational capabilities that existed in classification spaces most of them couldn't even access. But then something happened that would define the next stage of their crisis. Bridgerton, driven by humiliation and desperation to reassert some kind of authority, made a critical error in judgment. "I don't care what your classification says," he declared, moving towards Sarah with aggressive intent. "You're not conducting unauthorized operations from my briefing room." He reached for her shoulder with enough force to physically remove her from the area. Sarah moved. Morrison had seen special operations personnel in action before, but what happened next redefined his understanding of human capability. Sarah didn't just evade Bridgerton's grasp. She controlled it, redirected it, used his own momentum to spin him around while simultaneously stepping back in a movement so fluid it appeared almost choreographed. But in the process, Bridgerton's reaching hand caught the fabric of her white shirt. The material tore completely across the back, and suddenly, everyone in War Room Alpha was staring at the most intricate tattoo any of them had ever seen. A black compass rose spanning Sarah's entire back, rendered in such detail it seemed three-dimensional. At the center, an elegant script that seemed to glow under the fluorescent lights, a single word, Nightfall. Surrounding the compass, coordinates that Morrison recognized as operational zones in Afghanistan, Syria, and Ukraine. But it was the imagery framing the entire design that took their breath away. Fallen angel wings, each feather rendered with artistic precision that spoke of hours of detailed work, spreading across her shoulders like a declaration of identity. For exactly 3 seconds, the room existed in absolute silence. Then Admiral Hawthorne stood so quickly, his chair toppled backward, his weathered features showing recognition and something that looked like reverence. "Holy cow," Morrison whispered, his voice barely audible in the shocked quiet. "That's impossible." Lieutenant Sterling pulled out her phone with trembling hands, photographing the tattoo for verification against classified personnel databases, her training overriding her amazement. Colonel Hunt's experienced eyes widened with understanding and disbelief. Nightfall died in Kandahar. The after-action reports confirmed KIA status with full military honors. "The after-action reports," Sarah said with quiet authority as she turned to face them, making no attempt to cover the exposed tattoo, "were necessary cover for deep penetration operations that required official death status." But it was Bridgerton's reaction that would be remembered by everyone present. He stumbled backward, his perfect features contorting with the realization of what he had just done, who he had just physically confronted, how completely he had misunderstood everything. "You're dead," he said, his voice cracking with shock. According to every official record, Nightfall died 18 months ago with full military honors. Sarah met his gaze with eyes that held 18 months of being a ghost, 18 months of operating in the spaces between life and death, where normal rules didn't apply, where survival required becoming something beyond normal human limitations. "According to official records," she replied with surgical precision, "Nightfall never existed in the first place." Morrison's laptop erupted with activity as his database searches finally accessed classification levels that had been blocked before. Status updates flooded his screen. Classification, update, deceased to deep cover active, authorization level, Ghost Protocol unlimited, operational authority, no restrictions, mission parameters, classified above current clearance. The room's dynamics shifted completely and irrevocably. These were hardened military professionals who understood rank, authority, and operational hierarchy. They were looking at someone whose clearance levels exceeded their own, whose operational authority superseded their commands, whose very existence was classified beyond their access. Colonel Hunt stepped forward with military precision, her decades of experience allowing her to adapt to radically changed circumstances with professional efficiency. "Ma'am," she said with formal respect, "what do you require for mission success?" The formal address sent shockwaves through the room. Hunt, a full colonel with 30 years of distinguished service, was addressing Sarah with the respect reserved for superior officers. Immediate extraction authorization, full operational support, and access to specialized equipment appropriate for hostile environment infiltration, Sarah replied, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command decisions that affected life and death. Morrison stared at his computer screen, reading operational summaries that redefined his understanding of modern warfare. "Ma'am, according to these files, you've been conducting solo operations behind enemy lines for over 18 months. The intelligence gathered appears to be the foundation for multiple successful operations across several theaters. Solo operations were necessary to maintain cover integrity and prevent enemy forces from identifying patterns that would compromise other American assets," Sarah explained with clinical precision. "But extraction of captured personnel requires coordinated team action with precise timing and specialized capabilities." Admiral Hawthorne, his 30 years of command experience allowing him to process rapidly changing situations with deadly efficiency, moved closer with renewed respect and growing understanding of the scope of what they were dealing with. "Nightfall," he said, using her operational designation with appropriate formality, "what specific capabilities do you require for mission success?" Sarah moved to the main display screen, her movements now showing the confident efficiency of someone operating in their natural element. The nervous, submissive analyst had vanished completely, replaced by an operator whose presence commanded attention and respect. 3-person extraction team with electronic warfare specialist, demolitions expert qualified in Soviet-era infrastructure, and combat medic trained in emergency battlefield treatment, she said without hesitation. Timeline for infiltration and extraction, 4 hours total, with 2 hours for approach and 2 hours for extraction and egress. Morrison looked up from his computer with something approaching awe. "Ma'am, mission summaries suggest you've conducted similar extractions successfully across multiple hostile territories. Success rate appears to be 100%. Success rates improve when operations are conducted by personnel specifically trained for hostile environment penetration rather than conventional military approaches," Sarah explained. "Enemy forces prepare for standard Western tactical doctrine. They don't anticipate operators trained in alternative methodologies. Advanced cryptographic training programs offer specialized course in digital forensics and cybersecurity for military intelligence professionals. The transformation in room dynamics was absolute. 18 minutes earlier, these officers had been mocking someone they assumed was incompetent. Now they were witnessing operational planning by someone whose capabilities exceeded their understanding and whose authority superseded their own. But the mission planning was interrupted by an urgent communication that changed the scope of their crisis entirely. Morrison's secure phone rang with the emergency tone reserved for immediate intelligence updates. He answered, listened for 45 seconds, and his face went white with alarm. "Ma'am," he said, looking directly at Sarah with something approaching panic, "we have a significant problem." "Specify the nature of the problem." "Enemy forces have detected our intelligence gathering activities related to rescue planning," Morrison replied with growing tension. "They're accelerating execution timeline to immediate action. Our assets have approximately 30 minutes before transfer to execution site." The room went dead silent as everyone processed the implications. 30 minutes to coordinate and deploy a rescue mission that would normally require weeks of planning. 30 minutes to infiltrate a hostile facility, extract 3 captured operatives, and escape without triggering an international incident. Admiral Hawthorne stepped forward with grim determination that reflected his decades of command experience in impossible situations. "Nightfall," he said with formal respect, "what are your operational requirements?" Sarah looked around the room, her blue eyes meeting each person's gaze with steady assessment. For 18 minutes, she had been the victim of their assumptions, their prejudices, their casual cruelty. Now she was their only hope for preventing a catastrophe that would reshape American intelligence operations worldwide. "I require immediate transport to forward staging area, real-time intelligence support, and complete operational autonomy, she said with quiet authority that filled the space. Mission success depends on speed, precision, and approaches that enemy forces won't anticipate. Morrison's laptop chimed with priority updates showing enemy force movements in real time. Ma'am, satellite imagery confirms assets are being prepared for immediate transport. Convoy departure estimated at 27 minutes. Sarah moved to the display screen, her fingers dancing across the interface with the expertise of 18 months spent manipulating similar systems under life-or-death pressure. New data appeared showing transport routes, timing windows, and tactical opportunities that hadn't been visible before. Convoy interception provides optimal extraction opportunity, she said, highlighting specific locations on the satellite imagery. Static facility assault requires extensive coordination. Mobile interception allows single operator approach with minimal collateral risk. Colonel Hunt leaned forward with intense focus. Single operator approach against an armed convoy? Single operator approach utilizing enemy operational assumptions against them, Sarah replied, with the calm confidence of someone who had survived impossible situations through superior planning and execution. Enemy forces expect either large-scale military response or no response. They don't anticipate precision intervention by individual operators with specialized capabilities. Bridgerton, still reeling from his spectacular misjudgment and the revelation of who he had been mocking, found his voice with difficulty. What can we do to support the mission? Sarah looked at him with eyes that held no vindictiveness, no satisfaction at his humiliation, just professional assessment of available resources and mission requirements. You can provide real-time intelligence coordination and prepare for casualty reception if extraction results in wounded personnel, she replied with clinical efficiency. As she spoke, her laptop chimed with final mission confirmations. Equipment lists, transport arrangements, communication protocols, everything required to transform an impossible rescue into a precisely executed operation. Ma'am, Morrison said, reading updates from multiple intelligence sources, convoy route analysis suggests 3 potential interception points. Which approach will you utilize? Sarah studied the display screen for exactly 12 seconds, her mind processing variables that included terrain analysis, enemy defensive positioning, timing windows, and escape route availability. All 3, she said with quiet certainty. The room went silent as everyone tried to understand what she meant. Ma'am, Colonel Hunt prompted. Enemy forces will prepare for single-point interception, Sarah explained, with tactical precision that spoke of extensive operational experience. Multiple approach vectors create confusion and force division of defensive resources. By the time they understand the actual attack point, extraction will be complete. Morrison stared at the tactical display with growing amazement. Ma'am, that approach requires coordination between multiple operators with split-second timing. That approach requires one operator with comprehensive training in multi-vector tactical deployment, Sarah corrected, which is precisely what Nightfall protocols were designed to provide. Admiral Hawthorne stepped closer, with the recognition of someone who understood they were witnessing operational capability that redefined modern military doctrine. Nightfall, he said with formal respect, you have complete operational authority and unlimited resource access. Bring our people home. Sarah looked around the room one final time at faces that had transformed from mockery to respect, from dismissal to awe. For 18 minutes, they had treated her as powerless. Now they understood she possessed capabilities that could reshape their understanding of what was possible. Sir, she said with quiet authority that carried the weight of 18 months spent operating beyond the edge of normal human endurance. I intend to. As she prepared to leave for an operation that would either save 3 American lives or add 4 more names to classified casualty lists, none of them noticed the figure observing through the war room's secure monitoring system. Someone who had been watching their entire briefing. Someone who now understood that the greatest threat to enemy intelligence operations was preparing to emerge from 18 months of hiding. In exactly 22 minutes, when Sarah's extraction would begin, that observer would be making communications that would reshape the battlefield entirely. But for now, War Room Alpha buzzed with urgent coordination while the most capable operator in American military history prepared to do what everyone else considered impossible. The hunt that had lasted 18 months was about to reach its conclusion, but neither the hunters nor the prey fully understood how completely the rules had changed. 22 minutes later, Serafina Blackwood was no longer in War Room Alpha. She had vanished with the efficiency of someone who had spent 18 months learning how to disappear, leaving behind only the scent of tactical preparation and the weight of transformed understanding. Morrison stared at his laptop screen, watching real-time satellite feeds that tracked a convoy of 3 armored vehicles moving through Eastern European countryside toward an execution site that would broadcast American failure to the world. The timestamp showed 18 minutes until arrival at the designated location. "Nightfall is in position," came the voice through secure communication channels, calm and professional, as if reporting weather conditions rather than preparing to attempt the impossible. Admiral Hawthorne stood before the main display screen, his weathered features showing the tension of someone whose 30 years of command experience had never prepared him for operations conducted by ghosts. The tactical overlay showed enemy positions, convoy routes, and a single blue dot representing an operator who officially didn't exist attempting a mission that defied every principle of conventional warfare. Bridgerton sat slumped in his chair, his perfect uniform somehow less pristine than it had been an hour earlier. The man who had spent 18 minutes mocking someone he assumed was powerless now watched helplessly as that same person risked her life to save Americans he couldn't even reach. How is she going to intercept 3 armored vehicles with a full security detail? He asked, his voice cracking with the weight of his earlier humiliation. "She's not going to intercept them," Colonel Hunt replied, her experienced eyes reading tactical displays with the expertise of someone who understood special operations at the highest levels. "She's going to make them come to her." The satellite feed showed the convoy approaching a narrow mountain pass where the road curved around a steep hillside. Standard defensive doctrine would position security teams at elevated positions to watch for ambush attempts from above. "Enemy forces are deploying exactly as anticipated," Morrison reported, watching thermal signatures spread across his screen. "Security teams taking positions on high ground, convoy maintaining formation through the pass." But then something happened that defied every tactical manual ever written. The lead armored vehicle simply stopped. Not from mechanical failure, not from roadblock, not from external attack. It just stopped in the middle of the narrow road, blocking passage for the vehicles behind it. Morrison leaned closer to his screen, trying to understand what he was seeing. The lead vehicle has halted without apparent cause. Driver appears to be getting out. Through high-resolution satellite imagery, they watched a figure exit the lead vehicle and walk calmly toward the passenger compartment where their captured assets were being held. But the figure wasn't moving like a hostage or prisoner. They moved with purposeful confidence, and something about their posture struck Morrison as familiar. "That's not possible," Bridgerton whispered. The figure raised their hand toward the security teams positioned on the hillside, and every weapon in sight lowered simultaneously. Not dropped in surrender, not aimed in defense, just lowered as if responding to recognized authority. Morrison's hands shook as understanding dawned. "She's not attacking the convoy. She's been part of it from the beginning." Admiral Hawthorne stepped closer to the display, his command experience processing implications that redefined everything they thought they understood about the mission. 18 months of deep cover infiltration. "She's been operating inside enemy intelligence networks," Colonel Hunt added with growing awe. "They don't know she's American. They think she's one of them." The satellite feed showed the passenger compartment of the second vehicle opening, and 3 figures emerged. Even at maximum resolution, they could see these weren't armed guards or enemy operatives. These were the captured American assets, moving with the cautious hope of people who had expected execution and found rescue instead. Morrison's secure phone chimed with a message that made his breath catch. "Package secured. 3 assets confirmed alive and mobile. Extraction in progress." "Extraction in progress," Bridgerton repeated. "Where are they going?" His answer came 60 seconds later, as a helicopter appeared on the satellite feed, approaching from coordinates that hadn't shown any aircraft presence moments before. But this wasn't an American military helicopter. The markings were Eastern European civilian transport, exactly the kind of aircraft that wouldn't trigger defensive responses in hostile territory. "Civilian transport with full documentation and diplomatic clearance," Morrison said, reading intelligence updates that streamed across his screen. "Flight plan filed 18 hours ago for humanitarian medical transport to neutral territory." Admiral Hawthorne allowed himself the first smile he had shown in months. She planned the entire operation before entering this briefing room. The helicopter landed beside the convoy with routine efficiency, and they watched figures board with the calm coordination of a scheduled passenger pickup rather than a desperate rescue under enemy fire. No weapons discharged, no defensive positions activated, no pursuit vehicles deployed. "How is this possible?" Bridgerton asked, his voice hollow with disbelief. "Because," Colonel Hunt replied with something approaching reverence, "she's been playing a game where enemy forces didn't know they were opposing anyone." Morrison's laptop chimed with final confirmation. Assets extracted successfully. All personnel healthy and mobile. Nightfall returning to operational status. Mission complete. The war room fell silent as everyone processed what they had just witnessed. Not a dramatic firefight against impossible odds, not a suicide mission with uncertain outcomes, but a perfectly executed operation that made the impossible appear routine. But then Morrison's expression changed as new data appeared on his screen. "Admiral, I'm receiving additional intelligence that changes our understanding of this operation significantly." "Specify." "The convoy that just released our assets wasn't the original transport," Morrison said, his voice tight with growing amazement. "Intelligence intercepts suggest the actual convoy was intercepted 47 minutes ago. Our assets were transferred to vehicles under Nightfall's operational control before we even began mission planning." The implications hit the room like physical blows. Hawthorne stepped back from the display screen, his weathered features showing recognition of something that transcended normal operational capability. "She extracted them before we knew they needed extraction. The entire briefing, the emergency timeline, the impossible mission parameters," Hunt added with growing understanding, "we're cover for an operation that was already complete." Bridgerton looked around the room with the expression of someone whose understanding of reality had been fundamentally altered. She was never asking for help with the rescue. She was providing intelligence about enemy penetration of our networks. Morrison nodded slowly, pieces falling into place with terrifying clarity. The communication intercepts, the evidence of network compromise, the real-time intelligence about enemy capabilities. She's been gathering this for 18 months while maintaining deep cover. "And today," Admiral Hawthorne said with quiet reverence, "she chose to surface and share what she learned. Sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones nobody suspects, right? If this story made you think twice about judging someone by their cover, subscribe for more tales of hidden warriors who strike from the shadows." The secure communication system chimed with an incoming transmission, bearing Nightfall's authorization codes. Sarah's voice filled the war room with calm professional efficiency. "Base, this is Nightfall. Mission parameters complete. All assets recovered and in secure transport. Requesting debrief authorization for intelligence package delivery." Admiral Hawthorne moved to the communication panel with the respect due to someone who had just redefined his understanding of what was possible in modern warfare. "Nightfall, this is Base Actual. You are cleared for full debrief with unlimited classification authority. What is your status?" "Base Actual, I am returning to forward operations with comprehensive intelligence package documenting enemy penetration of American Special Operations networks. Estimated scope includes compromise at levels requiring immediate command attention." Morrison felt ice form in his stomach. Command attention meant penetration extending into the highest levels of military and intelligence leadership. "Nightfall, what specific levels of compromise are we discussing?" "Base Actual, enemy forces have been receiving real-time intelligence about American Special Operations for approximately 8 months through sources with access to planning at the Joint Chiefs level." The silence that followed was absolute. Joint Chiefs level meant compromise at the very top of American military command structure. Enemy forces hadn't just penetrated intelligence networks. They had infiltrated the decision-making apparatus that controlled global military operations. Bridgerton's face went white. "Joint Chiefs level, that means enemy forces have been watching our most sensitive operations in real time," Hunt finished, her voice tight with the implications. "Including operations planned in rooms like this one." Morrison's laptop erupted with priority alerts as intelligence agencies across the government began processing the scope of what Sarah had uncovered. "I'm receiving confirmation requests from NSA, CIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, and agencies whose acronyms I don't recognize. Because," Admiral Hawthorne said grimly, "if Nightfall's intelligence is accurate, we're dealing with the largest intelligence compromise in American military history." The communication system crackled again with Sarah's voice. Base actual intelligence package includes documentation of specific penetration methods, identification of compromised personnel, and evidence of ongoing operations designed to eliminate American intelligence assets worldwide. Nightfall, you're describing systematic warfare against American intelligence infrastructure. Affirmative, base actual. Enemy strategy appears focused on elimination of American special operations capability through identification and targeted removal of key personnel. Morrison looked up from his screen with growing alarm. Ma'am, if that assessment is accurate, how many operations have been compromised? Specialist Morrison, preliminary analysis suggests 73% of American special operations conducted in the past 8 months were known to enemy forces before deployment. The number hit the room like a physical blow. 73% meant the vast majority of American special operations had been walking into situations where enemy forces knew they were coming. How many casualties? Colonel Hunt asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Casualties remain classified pending family notification protocols, Sarah replied, with professional precision that couldn't hide the weight behind her words. But operational effectiveness has been reduced to levels that threaten American special operations capability worldwide. Bridgerton stood slowly, his perfect posture finally showing the weight of understanding what he had witnessed. You've been fighting a war that none of us knew was happening. Commander Bridgerton, I've been fighting a war that enemy forces assumed no one would detect because they controlled American intelligence gathering capabilities. The tactical implications were staggering. If enemy forces controlled intelligence gathering, they could monitor American responses to their own operations, adjust tactics in real time, and eliminate threats before they developed into operational problems. Morrison's hands shook as he processed intelligence updates that painted a picture of systematic warfare conducted in shadows most people couldn't even access. Ma'am, the scope of enemy operations appears to extend beyond military targets. Explain. Intelligence intercepts suggest enemy forces have been targeting civilian infrastructure, economic systems, and political networks using intelligence gathered from compromised American sources. Affirmative. Enemy strategy appears designed to undermine American influence globally through targeted elimination of key personnel and strategic assets. Admiral Hawthorne moved closer to the communication panel, his 30 years of experience struggling to process the scope of what they were discussing. Nightfall, what is your assessment of current American capability to respond to this level of systematic compromise? Base actual, current American capability is severely degraded but not eliminated. Enemy forces made a critical error by assuming their penetration was undetected. 18 months of deep cover operations has provided comprehensive understanding of their methods, personnel, and strategic objectives. Morrison felt hope beginning to overcome horror. Ma'am, you're saying we can counter their operations? I'm saying their operations depend on secrecy and surprise that no longer exist, Sarah replied with quiet confidence. Enemy forces designed their strategy around controlling American intelligence. They didn't anticipate American intelligence gathering information about them. The communication system chimed with incoming priority traffic from multiple agencies. Morrison's screen filled with requests for immediate briefings from command structures across the government. Admiral, he reported, we're receiving urgent requests for Nightfall briefings from Pentagon leadership, congressional oversight committees, and intelligence agencies at classification levels I've never seen before. Because, Colonel Hunt observed, what we're discussing transcends normal intelligence operations. This is strategic warfare at the highest levels. The secure communication crackled with Sarah's voice again. But this time, something in her tone suggested urgency that hadn't been there before. Base actual, I'm receiving intelligence that requires immediate attention. Enemy forces have detected my extraction of American assets and are implementing contingency operations designed to eliminate compromised networks. Specify the nature of contingency operations. Base actual, enemy forces are systematically eliminating personnel with knowledge of their penetration operations. Intelligence suggests they're preparing to activate sleeper assets within American command structure to prevent investigation of their activities. Morrison's blood ran cold. Sleeper assets within command structure. That means people we trust, people with authority to shut down investigations, people with access to classified information, may be working for enemy intelligence services. Admiral Hawthorne finished with grim understanding. The implications were terrifying. If enemy forces had sleeper assets within American command structure, any investigation into their operations could be shut down. Any response could be anticipated and countered. Any personnel involved in exposure could be eliminated through official channels. Bridgerton's voice cracked as he processed the scope of what they were discussing. How do we know who to trust? We trust the person who spent 18 months gathering evidence while enemy forces tried to kill her, Colonel Hunt replied with stark simplicity. The communication system crackled with increasing urgency in Sarah's voice. Base Actual, I'm receiving multiple intelligence indicators suggesting enemy forces are implementing final phase operations designed to eliminate American special operations capability permanently. Nightfall, what constitutes final phase operations? Base Actual, enemy forces appear to be coordinating simultaneous strikes against American special operations personnel worldwide. Intelligence suggests they intend to eliminate American special operations capability through targeted assassination of key personnel. Morrison's laptop exploded with priority alerts from intelligence sources worldwide. I'm receiving reports of suspicious activities around special operations bases globally. This isn't theoretical anymore. Nightfall, Admiral Hawthorne said with growing urgency. What is your recommendation for immediate action? Base Actual, immediate action requires assumption that all normal communication channels are compromised. Enemy forces are monitoring American military communications and will adjust their operations based on our responses. The tactical problem was nightmare fuel for military commanders. How do you coordinate defense against an enemy who can monitor your coordination attempts? Nightfall, how do we coordinate response if communication channels are compromised? Base Actual, response coordination requires utilization of communication methods that enemy forces haven't penetrated. I am prepared to serve as primary intelligence coordinator using deep cover networks that remain secure. Morrison looked up from his screen with something approaching awe. Ma'am, you're volunteering to coordinate global counterintelligence operations using networks you've been building for 18 months? Specialist Morrison, I'm stating that effective response to enemy operations requires utilization of intelligence networks that enemy forces don't know exist. Admiral Hawthorne stepped closer to the communication panel, his command experience recognizing the scope of what Sarah was offering. Nightfall, that level of coordination would require you to maintain deep cover status while directing operations across multiple theaters simultaneously. Affirmative, Base Actual. Operational requirements exceed normal parameters, but enemy strategy requires responses beyond conventional military doctrine. The room fell silent as everyone processed what they were hearing. Sarah wasn't just offering to help coordinate response to enemy operations. She was volunteering to become the primary intelligence node for global counter-operations while maintaining cover deep enough to continue gathering intelligence. Morrison's secure phone rang with the emergency tone that indicated communication from the highest levels of government. He answered, listened for 90 seconds, and his face went ashen. Admiral, I'm receiving confirmation that suspicious activities around special operations bases aren't theoretical. NSA is reporting coordinated surveillance activities at 17 different locations worldwide. Coordinated surveillance activities? Activities consistent with preparation for simultaneous strikes against American special operations personnel, Morrison replied, his voice tight with alarm. Intelligence suggests enemy forces are implementing final phase operations within the next 6 hours. 6 hours to prevent systematic elimination of American special operations capability worldwide. The communication system crackled with Sarah's voice, carrying urgency that transcended her usual professional calm. Base Actual, intelligence intercepts confirm enemy forces are implementing Operation Final Shadow. This is systematic elimination of American special operations capability through coordinated strikes designed to appear as unrelated accidents or enemy actions. Admiral Hawthorne felt the weight of 30 years of command experience pressing down on his shoulders. Nightfall, what do you require to counter Operation Final Shadow? Base Actual, I require immediate authorization to activate deep cover networks across all theaters and coordinate defensive operations, using intelligence that enemy forces assume doesn't exist. Morrison stared at his laptop screen, reading classification authorizations that appeared faster than he could process them. Ma'am, I'm seeing authorization requests at levels that require presidential approval. Because, Colonel Hunt said grimly, What we're discussing isn't just military operations. It's warfare for control of global intelligence infrastructure. The communication system chimed with new transmission that carried presidential authorization codes. "This is Command Actual," came a voice that Morrison recognized as belonging to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. "Nightfall, you are hereby authorized to coordinate global counterintelligence operations with unlimited resource access and complete operational autonomy. Authorization extends to all agencies and commands worldwide." The weight of that authorization settled over the war room like a physical presence. Unlimited operational autonomy meant Sarah could direct operations involving any American military or intelligence resource anywhere in the world. "Command Actual, authorization acknowledged. Implementing defensive operations immediately using deep cover networks with 18 months of intelligence preparation." Morrison's screen filled with data streams that showed military bases worldwide beginning coordinated defensive operations with speed and precision that suggested extensive advanced planning. "How is this possible?" Bridgerton asked, watching global operations coordinate with efficiency that defied normal military logistics. "Because," Admiral Hawthorne replied with growing understanding, "she's been preparing for this moment for 18 months. The main display screen filled with tactical overlays showing American military installations worldwide. But instead of vulnerable targets waiting for enemy attack, they showed coordinated defensive positions that suggested advanced knowledge of enemy operational plans. Enemy forces plan their operations around systematic elimination of unprepared targets, Colonel Hunt observed, but the targets aren't unprepared anymore. Morrison watched intelligence updates stream across his screen, showing enemy operations encountering resistance they hadn't anticipated. Surveillance teams finding positions already monitored by American counter-surveillance. Assassination attempts disrupted by security measures that shouldn't have existed. Coordinated strikes meeting coordinated defense. "Enemy operations are failing worldwide," he reported with growing amazement. "They're encountering defensive measures that suggest advanced knowledge of their operational plans." The communication system crackled with Sarah's voice, carrying satisfaction that 18 months of dangerous work had finally reached fruition. "Base Actual, enemy forces designed their strategy around American ignorance of their capabilities and intentions. That ignorance no longer exists." Admiral Hawthorne allowed himself a smile that carried 30 years of victories and defeats. "Nightfall, you've turned their own strategy against them." "Affirmative, Base Actual. Enemy forces relied on secrecy and surprise that American intelligence networks have been systematically eliminating for 18 months. Morrison's laptop chimed with priority updates showing the scope of ongoing operations. "Ma'am, I'm reading reports of enemy personnel being captured worldwide. The intelligence gathered appears to be providing evidence of the largest intelligence operation in modern history." Specialist Morrison, intelligence gathered during 18 months of deep cover operations has provided comprehensive understanding of enemy networks, personnel, methods, and strategic objectives. Bridgerton stood slowly, his perfect uniform somehow looking less important than it had hours earlier. "You've been building a case against them for 18 months while they thought they were winning." "Commander Bridgerton, enemy forces assumed American intelligence capabilities were neutralized. That assumption proved inaccurate. The tactical displays showed enemy operations collapsing worldwide, as networks that had operated in secrecy for years found themselves exposed to American intelligence services that had been preparing comprehensive responses." But then Morrison's expression changed as new intelligence appeared on his screen. "Ma'am, I'm receiving reports that enemy forces are implementing final contingency operations." "Specify." "They're attempting to eliminate evidence of their penetration by activating sleeper assets within American command structure to shut down investigations and eliminate key personnel." The room went silent as everyone processed the implications. Even with enemy operations failing worldwide, they could still succeed if they could shut down investigations through compromised American personnel. "Nightfall, are you prepared for enemy attempts to eliminate investigations through official channels?" "Base Actual, I am prepared for enemy attempts to utilize compromised American personnel to eliminate evidence of their operations." Morrison leaned forward with growing tension. "Ma'am, how do you counter enemy assets within American command structure?" "By providing evidence so comprehensive that no individual has the authority to suppress it," Sarah replied with quiet confidence. and by ensuring that evidence reaches personnel whose loyalty is beyond question. Admiral Hawthorne stepped closer to the communication panel. What personnel have you identified as beyond question? Base Actual, 18 months of intelligence gathering has provided extensive analysis of American command personnel. Individuals with uncompromised loyalty have been identified and prepared to receive comprehensive evidence packages. Morrison's screen filled with data showing classified evidence packages being transmitted to military and intelligence commanders worldwide. But these weren't random distribution. They were targeted transmissions to specific personnel whose loyalty had been verified through 18 months of careful observation. Enemy forces spent months identifying American personnel they could compromise, Colonel Hunt observed with growing understanding. But Nightfall spent months identifying American personnel they couldn't compromise. The communication system crackled with urgent transmission from multiple sources as evidence packages reached their intended recipients worldwide. Base Actual, evidence packages have been delivered to uncompromised command personnel across all theaters. Enemy sleeper assets no longer possess the authority to suppress investigations. Morrison watched his screen fill with confirmation reports from military commanders worldwide acknowledging receipt of evidence that documented the largest intelligence penetration in American military history. Ma'am, I'm receiving confirmations from commands across all theaters. Evidence has been received and authenticated by personnel with authority to investigate and prosecute enemy operations. Specialist Morrison, evidence packages include complete documentation of enemy penetration methods, compromised personnel identification, and operational evidence sufficient for comprehensive legal action. Admiral Hawthorne felt the weight of 30 years lifting from his shoulders as he understood the scope of what had been accomplished. Nightfall, you've provided evidence that will eliminate enemy intelligence networks worldwide while identifying and neutralizing their penetration of American operations. Affirmative, Base Actual. 18 months of deep cover operations have provided sufficient intelligence to restore American special operations capability while eliminating enemy capabilities that threatened global security. Morrison looked around the war room at faces that had been transformed by witnessing something that redefined their understanding of modern warfare. Ma'am, what is your current operational status? Specialist Morrison, current operational status is mission complete with ongoing intelligence coordination as required by global security considerations. But then the communication system chimed with a tone that indicated priority transmission from Sarah's field position. Base Actual, I'm receiving intelligence that requires immediate command attention. Nightfall, specify. Base Actual, enemy forces have implemented final contingency operations that extend beyond intelligence networks into systematic targeting of civilian infrastructure worldwide. Morrison's blood ran cold. Civilian infrastructure targeting? Affirmative. Enemy strategy includes systematic elimination of civilian infrastructure supporting American global operations. Intelligence suggests coordinated strikes against power grids, communication networks, and transportation systems designed to create strategic chaos. Admiral Hawthorne stepped back from the communication panel as the scope of enemy operations expanded beyond anything they had previously considered. Nightfall, what is the timeline for civilian infrastructure targeting? Base Actual, intelligence suggests infrastructure strikes will commence within 4 hours unless enemy command structure can be neutralized immediately. 4 hours to prevent systematic attacks on civilian infrastructure that supported American global operations. Morrison's hands shook as he processed the implications. Admiral, if enemy forces can eliminate civilian infrastructure supporting our global operations, they can effectively neutralize American military capability without direct military confrontation. Which means, Colonel Hunt added grimly, this isn't just warfare against American military forces. It's warfare against American civilization. The communication system crackled with Sarah's voice carrying urgency that transcended normal operational parameters. Base Actual, neutralizing enemy command structure requires direct action against personnel positioned in locations that American forces cannot officially access. Nightfall, you're describing operations beyond normal military authority. Affirmative, Base Actual. Enemy command personnel have positioned themselves in neutral territories and civilian areas where American military action would create international incidents. Admiral Hawthorne understood immediately. Enemy commanders had positioned themselves where they couldn't be reached through normal military operations, forcing any response to operate outside legal channels. Nightfall, what is your operational recommendation? Base Actual, my operational recommendation is continued deep cover operations utilizing networks that can access targets beyond normal military reach. Morrison realized what she was volunteering for. Ma'am, you're offering to conduct assassination operations against enemy commanders in locations where American forces can't operate officially. Specialist Morrison, I'm offering to conduct precision elimination operations against enemy command personnel whose continued existence threatens American civilian infrastructure. The weight of that decision settled over the war room like a physical presence. They were discussing operations that would eliminate enemy threats but couldn't appear in any official records. Bridgerton found his voice with difficulty. Those operations would be completely deniable. No official support, no extraction capability, no backup if things go wrong. Commander Bridgerton, those operations require complete deniability to protect American interests while eliminating threats to civilian infrastructure. Admiral Hawthorne stepped closer to the communication panel, his command experience recognizing the scope of what Sarah was offering. Nightfall, that level of operation would require you to remain deep cover indefinitely while conducting missions that officially don't exist. Affirmative, Base Actual. Mission parameters exceed normal operational scope, but enemy threats to civilian infrastructure require responses beyond conventional military capability. Morrison stared at his screen, reading intelligence updates that painted a picture of systematic warfare against civilian targets that most people would never know was happening. Ma'am, you're volunteering to spend the rest of your operational career conducting missions that no one can officially acknowledge. Specialist Morrison, I'm volunteering to conduct missions that protect American civilian infrastructure from enemy operations designed to create strategic chaos. The communication system chimed with incoming transmission, bearing presidential authorization codes. This is Command Actual. Nightfall, you are hereby authorized to conduct precision operations against enemy command personnel with complete operational autonomy and unlimited resource access. These operations carry maximum classification and will not appear in any official records. The authorization was complete, final, and irreversible. Sarah would continue operating as a ghost, conducting missions that protected American interests while officially not existing. Command Actual, authorization acknowledged. Implementing precision operations against enemy command structure using deep cover networks with established access capabilities. Morrison watched tactical displays showing global operations beginning to coordinate with precision that suggested months of advanced planning had anticipated this exact scenario. She's been preparing for this moment since she went deep cover, he realized aloud. Because, Admiral Hawthorne said with quiet reverence, she understood the scope of enemy operations before anyone else did. The main display showed intelligence updates indicating enemy command personnel worldwide, beginning to experience systematic elimination through methods that appeared as accidents, natural causes, or unrelated criminal activities. Enemy commanders are being neutralized without triggering international incidents or revealing American involvement, Colonel Hunt observed with professional admiration. Morrison's screen filled with confirmation reports showing enemy infrastructure strikes being prevented through elimination of command personnel who would have ordered them. Ma'am, I'm receiving confirmations that infrastructure strikes have been prevented through neutralization of enemy command capability. Specialist Morrison, enemy command structure has been systematically eliminated while maintaining operational security that protects American interests from international complications. Admiral Hawthorne allowed himself to understand the magnitude of what had been accomplished. Nightfall, you've eliminated enemy capabilities while preventing international incidents that would have compromised American global operations. Affirmative, Base Actual. Enemy operations have been neutralized while maintaining strategic relationships that support American global security interests. But then the communication system crackled with transmission that carried a different tone, something more personal than the professional efficiency that had characterized their communications. Base Actual, mission objectives have been completed successfully. Enemy intelligence networks have been eliminated, compromised American personnel have been identified, and enemy command structure has been neutralized. Morrison felt something that might have been sadness mixed with his relief. Ma'am, what is your current status? Specialist Morrison, Current status is mission complete with ongoing deep cover operations as required by global security considerations. The words carried finality that everyone in the room understood. Sarah would continue operating as Nightfall, conducting missions that officially didn't exist, protecting American interests while remaining officially dead. Nightfall, Admiral Hawthorne said with formal respect that carried 30 years of understanding what service meant. On behalf of everyone who will never know what you've accomplished, thank you. Base actual, service continues as required. Nightfall returning to operational status. The communication went silent, and everyone in the war room understood they had witnessed something that would never appear in any official record, but had reshaped the world in ways most people would never comprehend. Morrison closed his laptop slowly, his hands still shaking from processing intelligence that redefined his understanding of modern warfare. Bridgerton sat heavily in his chair, his perfect uniform and now seeming like a costume worn by someone playing at being important, while real warriors fought battles in shadows he couldn't even see. 18 minutes, he said quietly. For 18 minutes, I mocked someone whose capabilities exceeded my understanding by orders of magnitude. Colonel Hunt looked around the war room that had been transformed by witnessing operations beyond normal military parameters. She gave us the opportunity to understand what real service means, Hunt said with quiet respect. Most people will never know that threats to their daily lives were eliminated by someone whose existence they can't acknowledge. Admiral Hawthorne moved to the secure communication panel, entering commands that would classify their entire briefing at levels ensuring it would never appear in official records. Gentlemen, what we witnessed today didn't happen. The briefing we attended was routine intelligence coordination. The operator designated Nightfall remains officially deceased. Morrison nodded, understanding. Sir, what about our awareness of ongoing operations? Our awareness helps us understand why certain international incidents don't occur, why certain threats to American interests seem to resolve themselves, and why American special operations maintain effectiveness despite enemy attempts at systematic elimination. The room fell silent as everyone processed their new understanding of how the world actually worked versus how it appeared to work. But then Morrison's laptop chimed with an incoming message that made him understand their story was far from over. Admiral, I'm receiving priority intelligence that requires immediate attention. Specify. Morrison read the message twice before speaking, his voice tight with implications that extended far beyond what they had already discussed. Sir, intelligence indicates that the networks Nightfall eliminated were secondary operations. Enemy forces appear to have primary networks that remain active and are now implementing escalated operations in response to secondary network elimination. The words hit the room like physical blows. Admiral Hawthorne stepped closer with growing alarm. Primary networks? Intelligence suggests enemy operations included multiple layers designed to appear as primary threats while protecting actual primary operations from detection and elimination. Colonel Hunt felt ice form in her stomach. You're saying everything we just witnessed was them sacrificing secondary assets to protect primary operations? Intelligence suggests enemy strategy included contingency planning that anticipated secondary network compromise and prepared escalated primary operations as response. Morrison's screen filled with tactical data, showing enemy activities worldwide that dwarfed anything they had previously observed. Admiral, primary network operations appear to include systematic targeting of American political leadership, economic infrastructure, and military command structure simultaneously. The scope was terrifying. Not just intelligence networks or military operations, but systematic warfare against American civilization at every level. Morrison's secure phone rang with the emergency tone reserved for immediate action requirements. He answered, listened, and his face went white. Sir, I'm receiving reports of coordinated activities at locations worldwide that suggest primary network operations have commenced. What kind of coordinated activities? Activities consistent with preparation for systematic strikes against American leadership, infrastructure, and military capability designed to create total strategic chaos. Admiral Hawthorne understood they were facing something that transcended normal warfare parameters. Are we prepared for primary network operations? Morrison read his screen for 30 seconds before responding with information that changed everything. Sir, intelligence suggests Nightfall anticipated primary network operations and has been preparing comprehensive response capabilities for the past 18 months. Explain? Secondary network elimination appears to have been designed to force primary network exposure, allowing preparation of response operations against targets that remained hidden until now. Colonel Hunt felt understanding dawn with something approaching awe. She used secondary network operations to expose primary networks? Intelligence suggests 18 months of deep cover operations included systematic analysis designed to identify and prepare responses to multiple operational layers, including primary networks that enemy forces assumed would remain hidden. Morrison's laptop erupted with data showing global operations coordinating with precision that suggested advanced preparation for scenarios that were only now becoming apparent. Admiral, Nightfall appears to have been preparing for primary network operations since beginning deep cover status 18 months ago. The communication system crackled to life with Sarah's voice, carrying calm professional efficiency that somehow made the impossible sound routine. Base Actual, this is Nightfall. Primary network operations have commenced as anticipated, implementing comprehensive response protocols using deep cover networks prepared for this contingency. Admiral Hawthorne felt 30 years of experience struggling to process operational scope that redefined his understanding of strategic planning. Nightfall, you anticipated primary network operations? Affirmative, Base Actual. Secondary network elimination was designed to force primary network exposure while providing comprehensive intelligence about enemy strategic capabilities that remained hidden until implementation became necessary. Morrison stared at his screen, showing global operations that seemed to span every continent, every major city, every significant target that could affect American interests worldwide. Ma'am, the scope of primary network operations appears to exceed anything in modern military history. Specialist Morrison, primary network operations represent enemy attempts to eliminate American global influence through systematic targeting of leadership, infrastructure, and strategic capabilities simultaneously. And our response capabilities? Response capabilities include comprehensive counter-operations prepared through 18 months of deep cover intelligence gathering, specifically designed to neutralize primary network operations. Morrison watched tactical displays showing American defensive operations coordinating worldwide with speed and precision that suggested extensive advanced preparation. Ma'am, how extensive are the response operations? Specialist Morrison, response operations include systematic neutralization of primary network capabilities while maintaining operational security that prevents international incidents or revealing American involvement. Admiral Hawthorne stepped closer to the communication panel with growing understanding of what Sarah had actually accomplished during 18 months of deep cover operations. Nightfall, you've been preparing comprehensive response to enemy strategic warfare for 18 months? Affirmative, Base Actual. Mission parameters required preparation for enemy operations at all levels, including strategic warfare designed to eliminate American global influence permanently. The weight of that preparation settled over the war room, as everyone understood they were witnessing the conclusion of the largest intelligence operation in American military history. Morrison's screen showed operations worldwide reaching successful conclusion with efficiency that made systematic enemy strategic warfare appear as isolated incidents with no apparent connection to coordinated attack against American interests. Ma'am, primary network neutralization appears to be proceeding successfully without international complications. Specialist Morrison, primary network operations have been systematically neutralized while maintaining strategic relationships and preventing revelation of enemy strategic warfare attempts. But then the communication system chimed with a tone that indicated something beyond even the primary network operations. Base Actual, intelligence indicates enemy strategic warfare included tertiary contingency operations designed to activate if primary networks were neutralized. Morrison felt the world tilt around him. Tertiary operations? Affirmative. Enemy strategic planning included multiple contingency layers designed to ensure American global influence would be eliminated regardless of response effectiveness to secondary or primary operations. Admiral Hawthorne struggled to process operational scope that seemed to extend beyond anything conceivable in modern strategic planning. Nightfall, what constitutes tertiary contingency operations? Base Actual. Tertiary operations include systematic targeting of American civilian population centers, using assets positioned within American territory during the past several years. The words hit the room like nuclear explosions. Morrison's hands shook as he understood the implications. Sleeper cells within American territory targeting civilian population centers? Affirmative. Intelligence suggests enemy strategic planning included positioning of assets within American civilian areas with capabilities to create mass casualty events designed to eliminate American domestic stability. The scope was beyond nightmare scenarios discussed in worst-case planning sessions. Not just attacks on military or government targets, but systematic warfare against American civilian populations. Colonel Hunt felt horror mixing with determination. How many assets? What capabilities? Intelligence suggests approximately 200 assets positioned in major metropolitan areas, with capabilities ranging from conventional explosives to chemical and biological weapons. 200 assets with chemical and biological capabilities meant potential casualties that could reach into millions of American civilians. Admiral Hawthorne stepped back from the communication panel as the true scope of enemy strategic warfare became apparent. Nightfall, this level of threat requires immediate comprehensive response. Affirmative, base actual. Comprehensive response protocols have been prepared and are being implemented using intelligence gathered during 18 months of deep cover operations. Morrison watched his screen fill with tactical data showing law enforcement and military operations coordinating across American territory with precision that suggested extensive advance preparation. Ma'am, how is comprehensive domestic response possible without revealing the existence of tertiary threat operations? Specialist Morrison, domestic response utilizes coordination between agencies with cover stories that explain tactical operations without revealing systematic enemy warfare against civilian populations. Morrison watched operations across American territory that appeared as unrelated law enforcement activities but were systematically neutralizing threats that could have killed millions of American civilians. Ma'am, I'm receiving confirmations of successful operations nationwide. Assets are being neutralized without public awareness of threat scope. Specialist Morrison, enemy assets have been systematically eliminated while maintaining public safety and preventing awareness of enemy strategic warfare attempts against civilian populations. Admiral Hawthorne felt the magnitude of what had been prevented settling over him like physical weight. Nightfall, you've prevented systematic warfare against American civilian populations while maintaining domestic stability and preventing public awareness of threat scope. Affirmative, base actual. Enemy strategic warfare has been comprehensively neutralized at all operational levels while protecting American civilian populations and maintaining strategic relationships globally. The communication system went silent for several minutes as everyone in the war room processed the scope of what had been accomplished. Morrison closed his laptop slowly, understanding that he had witnessed something that redefined his comprehension of modern warfare and the people who fought it in shadows most citizens would never see. Bridgerton sat in stunned silence, his earlier mockery now seeming like blasphemy against someone whose service transcended anything he had previously understood. She spent 18 months preventing World War III while we worried about briefing protocols, he said quietly. Colonel Hunt looked around the war room that had been transformed by witnessing operations that officially never happened, but had preserved everything they valued. She saved American civilization while maintaining cover so deep that her existence couldn't be officially acknowledged. Admiral Hawthorne moved to his command station, understanding that normal military operations would continue while real protection was provided by ghosts whose service couldn't be recognized. Gentlemen, today we learned that our security depends on people whose sacrifice we can never officially acknowledge. Morrison nodded, understanding his new role in protecting the secrecy that protected everything else. But then his laptop chimed with one final message that made him understand their story wasn't ending, but beginning a new chapter. Admiral, I'm receiving final transmission from Nightfall. Display. Morrison read the message aloud. Base actual. Strategic warfare operations have been successfully neutralized at all levels. American civilian populations are secure, strategic relationships are maintained, and enemy capabilities have been comprehensively eliminated. Nightfall returning to deep cover status, with ongoing mission parameters classified above current authorization levels. The finality of the message was unmistakable. Sirrah would continue operating as a ghost, protecting American interests through missions that couldn't be acknowledged while officially remaining dead. Ongoing mission parameters, Admiral Hawthorne repeated. There are additional threats. Morrison's bright screen displayed one final piece of intelligence that made everyone understand why Nightfall's service couldn't end. Sir, intelligence indicates that neutralized networks were components of larger strategic operations, involving multiple nations and organizations, working to eliminate American global influence permanently. Multiple nations? Intelligence suggests coordinated strategic warfare by alliances that view American global influence as existential threat to their own strategic objectives. Admiral Hawthorne understood they had witnessed the prevention of immediate threats while larger strategic warfare continued at levels requiring ongoing ghost operations to counter. How many ongoing threats? Morrison read his screen for 30 seconds before responding with information that redefined their understanding of global strategic reality. Sir, intelligence suggests ongoing strategic warfare by approximately 12 nation-states and 47 organizations, working individually and in coordination to eliminate American global influence through methods ranging from economic warfare to systematic terrorism. The scope meant ongoing warfare that most Americans would never know was happening, fought by people whose existence couldn't be officially acknowledged. And our response capabilities? Response capabilities include ongoing deep cover operations by personnel whose official status remains classified above our authorization levels. Admiral Hawthorne nodded understanding. American security would be protected by ghosts whose service couldn't be recognized, whose sacrifice couldn't be acknowledged, whose very existence had to remain secret. Gentlemen, we return to normal operations with the understanding that our safety depends on people we can never thank for service we can never officially recognize. Morrison packed his laptop, understanding his role in protecting secrets that protected everything else. Bridgerton stood slowly, his perfect uniform now seeming appropriate for someone whose job was to maintain visible military presence, while real protection was provided by invisible guardians. Colonel Hunt gathered classified materials that would be secured at levels ensuring their contents remained secret, while their implications guided policy decisions that officially had different justifications. 18 minutes, Bridgerton said as they prepared to leave. 18 minutes when I thought I understood who deserved respect and who didn't. Admiral Hawthorne paused at the door of War Room Alpha, looking back at the space where they had witnessed something that would never appear in any official record, but had preserved everything they valued. Those 18 minutes taught us that the most important service is often invisible, the greatest sacrifice is often unacknowledged, and the strongest warriors are often the ones nobody suspects. As they left War Room Alpha, Morrison caught a glimpse of his reflection in the polished surface of the conference table. He looked the same as when he had entered that morning, but everything had changed. Somewhere in the world, Serafina Blackwood was returning to deep cover status, conducting missions that officially didn't exist, protecting American interests while remaining officially dead. Her service would continue in shadows, where normal people couldn't operate, fighting warfare most citizens would never know was happening. The war room fell silent, but the protection it had witnessed would continue indefinitely, provided by ghosts whose existence couldn't be acknowledged, but whose sacrifice made everything else possible. In 6 months, when international incidents that should have occurred simply didn't happen, when terrorist attacks that intelligence suggested were planned never materialized, when economic warfare that threatened American interests seemed to resolve through fortunate circumstances, Morrison would remember 18 minutes when everything he thought he understood about strength and service was completely redefined. And somewhere in the world, Nightfall would continue hunting in shadows, protecting the light that most people took for granted while remaining invisible to the very people whose lives depended on her service. The Ghost War would continue, fought by warriors whose names would never appear on monuments, but whose sacrifice preserved everything those monuments represented. Justice, as Admiral Hawthorne had learned, wasn't always loud or visible. Sometimes it was patient, invisible, and absolute, administered by angels who operated in darkness while protecting everyone else's right to live in the light. The hunt that had lasted 18 months was complete, but the mission that made that hunt necessary would continue as long as there were threats to everything worth protecting, defended by people whose service transcended recognition or reward. In the end, that was what real warriors understood. The greatest victories were the ones nobody ever knew about, won by people whose existence nobody could acknowledge, in service of principles that made everything else possible. The war room was empty now, but the war it had witnessed would continue indefinitely, fought by ghosts who chose to remain invisible so everyone else could live in safety, they would never comprehend was earned through sacrifice they could never acknowledge. That was the price of freedom. Constant vigilance by invisible guardians whose service couldn't be recognized because recognition would compromise the very protection they provided. And in that invisible warfare, Nightfall would continue to hunt, protect, and serve until the threats that required her sacrifice no longer existed or she no longer existed to oppose them. Either way, the mission would continue, carried by others trained in shadows, by someone whose legacy would never appear in any official record, but would inspire invisible warriors for generations to come. The greatest heroes, Morrison had learned, were the ones whose names nobody would ever know.